just sort of record the conversation. He's going to hook something just there on your lapel, so he
Well,
can
now,
hear
what
it
is
good.
this time?
What we hope to do is just sit here and discuss and talk about your story, and then we'll tape the show Thursday, day after tomorrow, over at KAMU.
Oh,
And we try to do it. Is 2:30 still good? Is that a good?
Yeah.
At 2:30 in the afternoon.
okay.
Would that be convenient for you as far as you know? Good, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do it over at the KAMU studios.
Yeah.
And
Well, gosh, you've had a bunch of really interesting things.
well, we
Down on the Indianapolis, for example.
yeah, Glenn Morgan.
Glenn Morgan.
Yeah, Glenn Morgan. He was.
Yeah.
I met him several years ago,
Yeah.
and he was. He floated in the Pacific for for several days.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that,
Yeah.
all the things
Yeah.
that the fellows went through.
Yeah,
just
but that's one of the
Yeah.
that's one of the more unique stories. We had a fellow named Alton Meyer. Do you know him? He was a POW in Vietnam for 6 years. And
Well, I came on toward the ending. I say the ending. It was still going full blast.
Right.
That time. And then, so the fellows that were there early took a hell of a beating, you know.
yeah,
And so things had kind of quieted down. The German Air Force was not as strong and things like that. The targets were still there.
right.
And their flak was just as good, if not better.
Oh, I'll bet.
Than that, but
Are you having problems over there?
Can you, I left my glasses, can you see if you can squeeze that back in there? Sorry about this, folks.
Kyle had an automobile accident yesterday, so his week hasn't been
yesterday.
going
was that
good.
right? What happened on it?
You know where they're building the new Red Lobster, right there at Terrell
Yes.
University?
Yes.
I was sitting there waiting to turn left, right there by the Red Lobster, and there's a green turn arrow, but then after the green turn arrow goes, if there's nobody coming,
Yeah?
you can go. Well, so there was some traffic coming, so I was gonna go, then I thought they're too close, so I stopped. And my foot slipped, instead of hitting, I took my foot off the accelerator,
Oh,
went to go
boy.
to hit the brake, it slipped
Oh,
off the
boy.
brake, hit the accelerator, and my wheel was already turned to go left.
Oh.
So my car just went zoop, and this guy going about 40, 45 just T-boned me.
Oh,
I mean, it was, the car's totaled, and if somebody had been sitting in the passenger seat, they'd probably been
You
dead.
know, I've had that same thing, this business of the accelerator and the brake.
And I was just taking my foot off, moved it over to hit the brake, and it just slipped right off and went right back down to the accelerator.
well,
I was
were
so
you-
shocked that it's like, uh-oh. And if I wouldn't have hesitated of stopping, if I'd have just left my foot on the accelerator, I would have just zoomed right on through that intersection. But I hesitated, took my foot off, and then by the time I could say, this guy's coming, I've got to get out of here. Just as I was getting ready to punch it down again to see if I could make it, he hit me. I mean, it's smacked right.
you're
see
lucky
this-
that you weren't hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got a
Well,
cut here from all the glass coming in, and then these fingers over here are swollen, I guess, from me.
So it was a collision.
Oh, yeah, it was,
Priest.
yeah.
You're lucky on that.
Well, Kyle, I can't get that thing on there either. But so you just have to leave it off and figure it out later. It's running now. It's recording right now. Yeah, you just gotta
Oh, yeah, it is.
let the battery stay in there.
Yeah, somehow it's, that's the engineering.
Yeah, I don't know.
What'll I do
Maybe-
about my
Maybe you had that in the wreck.
hearing aids?
Actually, I'm gonna lay this right down here, because it's going right now.
Okay.
All I'm gonna do is this right here. And that's it.
Well, the reason Kyle has sort of taken over hosting the show, about 3.5 months ago, I got hit with a case of Bell's palsy.
Oh,
Oh,
And that's why I've been off the show. But the last Sunday in August, it hit me.
gosh.
And it still has a good grip on me. And that's what's going on here
that's,
with the right side of my face, is the paralysis is still
Yeah.
there. So it's,
Well, now you've handled the last few shows, haven't you?
well, the shows that you see me on now, those are repeats.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that right?
Anytime you see me on for the last month or so, those are repeat shows
Is that right?
that we've done in the last 3 years.
Gosh,
So-
just what you needed.
well,
Right,
can
right.
they do anything for it?
Well, I steroids and I'm on that, and some antivirals and B12, and I'm going to a chiropractor and getting some electrotherapy and all of that. But it just takes time. In most cases, it's 100% recovery or 90% or something.
Is that right?
But
There's nothing
But
they can do about it,
But
really.
it does
No.
take time.
Is that right?
it takes time.
Well, that's terrible.
It take
about
up
that?
6 months, 8 months, a year. It
Oh,
take.
yeah.
It's been about 3
Wow.
months for me now. So just something that I'm dealing with. But that's why I haven't.
Yeah.
That's why you've seen Kyle on the show and
That's good that you have a backup.
Well,
Isn't that so? And you've
I
got
hope,
good ones.
I hope to get back with it sometime, but, you know,
Yeah.
God will let me know
Yeah.
when that happens. So anyway,
Well, it's a great thing for the community. It really
well,
is.
thank you. We've done about 75 to 80 veterans.
Is that right?
In,
Is that right?
In the last 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, we're not running out. There's a lot of stories there to tell.
Well, good.
In fact, we got back from Thanksgiving on Sunday
Uh-huh.
and about 5, and I said, now we have to watch the veterans at 6:30.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
we're gonna miss it this week, so we did.
Right.
We did.
Right. Good. Well, talk about your sort of where'd you grow up? Where'd your
Well, I
schooling
was
and sort of how you
born-
got to the military?
Born in Idaho, but
Really?
actually my folks had moved to Michigan.
Uh-huh.
So I was at Michigan State when this thing started. I was out roaming around the campus and Sunday and came back in and somebody said we've been attacked on Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
And I wondered where in the hell Pearl Harbor.
I'd never even heard of it till then, right?
And from that point on, there was no question about it. Of course, everybody was anxious.
Right.
Totally different picture, wasn't it? They wanted to get in. And actually, we were afraid the darn war would stop before we could get to it, which is a sad operation.
Yeah.
But there was all that kind of background and backing these fellows had that made all the difference in the world. So,
So what ended up, that Sunday you heard this, what went through your head, and did you actually just go down that Monday or Tuesday and
Yeah,
this and say,
just-
I'm ready to go, send me over?
just any way you could enlist. And you looked at all the different options that you had and so forth, you know. And I got set on the Marines. But then fortunately, I got on the other side. Fellow one morning, a roommate said, let's go down and be checked out at Lansing because they're taking deals on the Air Force. And I never really thought about it. And he washed out because his eyesight wasn't good enough and I got in.
Okay.
So sometimes it turns around on you.
So go ahead.
Then in February of '44 was when I was taken in on the deal. And then of course you go through all the business of recruiting, you know, and they were looking, of course, for pilots at that time. They'd lost quite a few of them.
Did you have anything in your head as to what you wanted to do in the Air Force? Did you want to be a
Not
pilot?
particularly.
Did you
I
know
wanted
what
to
you
be a
wanted to
pilot,
do?
yeah. But other than that, why, whatever planes didn't come to me during that time. But as I say, there was a world of opportunity for a fellow to get in almost any group that he wanted to and so forth. And of course, Michigan State was a lot like Texas A&M at that time in terms of their ROTC and that sort of thing. So that helped on the deal. So then February of '44 was, 43 wasn't it, when I went in.
Must have been 43.
Was it 43? Yeah.
I'd have to look.
And started the process, and it's kind of a long process to finally get to where you're doing anything.
Right.
So they shipped us first to Florida, and we organized there, and then they shipped us to Pennsylvania, and we organized there, and then they shipped us to Texas. And finally, when we got back to Oklahoma, we finally got to flight training. But they were kind of holding up these people, you know, kind of in reserve. What they had. And so we went from there. And then the early training, preliminary training was there at Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City. So that was different for me. And one time when I was stationed at Aldous, Polly was only about 40 miles down the road going to school. And I had never met her, or didn't meet her at that time. And then 6 years later,
In 1950, we met.
a fellow wanted me to go out and have a cup of coffee with her there at Stillwater. So there was 6 years gap in there before we finally got together.
I'll be darned.
But you were stationed at Fort Worth,
Yeah, at Aldous at that time.
but you were down at Fort Worth
Yeah,
at one point.
and then we went from Aldous as our twin engine training, and then we went on up to Fort Worth at the airfield there, which is right, is still operating there, and is right next to Lake Worth that goes on the west side of it.
Right.
So when we came in for landing, we'd come over the lake and land on the
Bell
runway there.
helicopter also still out there, I think,
Yeah,
or somewhere around that little area.
I think so, yeah. So, and that's where we went from our twin engine training at Aldous, where I got the commission. You were commissioned in the Army. See, this is actually the U.S. Army.
The Army Air Corps.
Yeah,
Right.
we didn't have the Air Force at that time. We
Right.
just had the Army deal. So any commission you sought or anything else was in the Army at that time, and they were just a branch of it. But the final training wound up at Aldous at the deal there, and that's a lot different than what it is today, and the tremendous airport they have at Aldous Airstrip. But there's some things happening or happened to me during the preliminary training there at Oklahoma that was interesting to me, at least, because we had this Fairchild train that was somewhat like a Stearman, but it was a monoplane and so forth. And you were supposed to learn how to fly in that before you got any further along on the thing. And the fellow that was my instructor had a lot of other cadets that he was working on. So after I soloed finally, which I didn't know that I'd even be able to make, they kind of cut me loose to just kind of practice. And so I was my own instructor, but I really didn't know much about it. They talked
Kind of like
about
on-the-job training.
yeah, they talked about the chandelle, you know, where he's coming and turn back and so forth, and then a loop. You were supposed to do a loop, and that took a little nerve. And finally I did her, and I got upside down and heard the darndest clatter in that plane. I thought the thing is coming apart.
What were you flying now?
What was that? This training plane, this PT 14, I guess it was, Fairchild plane.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Anyway, when I straightened up, it quit, and I finally got back to the airfield, and we found out there was a crank loose in the fuselage, and that thing came loose during my loop.
Right as you got to the top part.
Sounded like I ought to leave. So that, and then they sent mentioned it there, they sent out the fellow from the Army to check us. After you'd flown about 12 hours, why then they had an Army officer come out and determine whether or not you're worth going on or not. So that was kind of the acid test, and one of the exercises they put on was that they'd pull back on the throttle and essentially cough it out, and then you were to make a forced landing. So he did that, and then the question was, where was I going to land?
Yeah.
And of course, I kind of thought that the wind was out of the west, and I ought to head to the west. And I kept making right and left and right and left, and finally I got down to 300 feet. And I made my last turn right into a pecan orchard. I'll never forget that old boy looking back at me. He said, you're going to land there? And I said, yeah. He said, take me home. So I went home kind of chagrined because I thought I'd probably wind up in the mess kitchen.
Right.
Well, that sort of thing. Was that out?
Oh, it knocked the batteries out, so I wouldn't have to let it restart it here as soon as it accessed.
Did I get any of that down there?
No, it just, somehow that little thing is broken off. And come on, reset here, guys. That's just okay. We'll let it go again for 10.
So on the way back, I was rather chagrined kind of a guy. I thought I'd washed out, and my instructor pilot heard about it and came rushing out of the storage place there with language that shouldn't be treated, and he said, nobody of mine's going to plumb out, get back in that plane. So that's the way I finally got through preliminary training summer. And then we went to the training at Kansas in the BT 17 or 13, and flew there, and then went down to Alice in the twin engine planes and started there. So it was a series of going on now.
Right. What was the twin engine training like?
Well, that was the old was it what they call the Apache or something? And I can't recall the name of it. It was kind of, one of them was the bamboo bomber, because they had actually used some wood on making the fuselage and so forth. And on top of that, they were very inflammable. And any kind of a fire around them was really a sad affair, because it would take them clear out of position. but that was a twin engine plane training. Then after that, we finally got to Fort Worth, and that's when we got into the B-24s at that time.
What was that like? What was your expectations when you?
Well, I was amazed at how big the plane was. And they had a pretty good, of course, today, as you put them up against a jet, they're small.
Right.
But in that day, a 4-engine plane like that looked awful big.
Right.
And that's probably where I came my closest call in any of the events that occurred on that, because we'd have a student pilot and I would do the flying, and then we had an instructor pilot who was only a couple of classes ahead of us, and also an engineer that would go along on any of the flights. And then we do most of our practicing north of Fort Worth and Dallas, up toward the Oklahoma line and so forth. And so I forget how many hours I had on it, not too many at that point, but we took off one night with the crew. The other fellow was from Milwaukee, and the instructor pilot was from Detroit, and the engineer was from Oregon at that time. So it's kind of a multi-mix on that point. And the other student pilot had the takeoff, and we went up to about 8,000 or 10,000 feet and maneuvered around. They would do all kinds of activities at that point with them. And then coming back is where I had my greatest experience on the flying. I was going to land the plane because the other student pilot had taken off, and we started down the west side of Fort Worth, and we loop around it and then come in and get lined up with the runway. And I was on the base leg, and I remember turning toward the field, and the lights were on, so we were making a good letdown, probably 1,500 feet or that level. And all of a sudden I felt a kind of a looseness of the controls. My foot was showing something was up, and I looked back, and one of our engines was on fire. The number 3 engine right next to the fuselage. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we'd had our flaps down and our wheels down, so we were getting a lot of drag.
Right.
But that third engine being out, you had no hydraulic control. You couldn't lift your wheels, you couldn't stand your flaps or anything else. You were just paralyzed, you might say, and losing airspeed and so forth. And I remember the instructor pilot and the engineer were desperately trying to get this auxiliary pump going so that we'd have some hydraulic pressure and so forth. We were right over the lake at that time, probably 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet up. And we were being turned around to the right, actually away from the runway, and we were losing speed along with it and airspeed and so forth. And all of a sudden, you could just feel that plane dropping. And I remember the instructor pilot said, "This is it." And all of a sudden, the doggone plane just stalled out and fell into the lake. And I can remember what it felt like before the stall came out, but after that I couldn't remember anything that took place. And some way we hit the water right near the beach there of Lake Worth, and somehow, they'll never figured out, the plane broke open, and the instructor and the student pilot and myself were thrown out of the plane. And the engineer was killed because the plane toppled over. I have a picture in the Fort Worth Telegram. It might be possible to get it in a lighter mode.
It might be. Wow.
But I actually came to in the sitting in my chair in the water up to my waist.
Wow. And
I remember getting up and unbuckling my seatbelt because I was still sitting in the chair. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking to the shore. And one thing I remember about it, it was so still. There was no silence about, no noise about anything. And the plane, as you see there, was up on its back and completely crushed at that time. The 2 wheels were sticking up in the air, I recall. And finally I got close enough to the beach there, and a fellow came and dragged me in to the land and so forth. And the student pilot was thrown clear down the beach there, and the instructor pilot was thrown on top of a building. And both of them were very badly hurt. really, I didn't feel anything hurt when I got up off the chair, and I remember yelling for some help, and the lights went on, and we were right at the edge of a cottage development. In fact, one of our wings went through the wall of a person that was sleeping right next to the wall then. The engineer was caught in the bomb bays and either drowned or was killed.
Right.
But the three of us, got out of it that way and so forth.
Wow.
And they, of course, thought that something must be wrong. Actually, I was walking around with a little help.
Yeah.
So they sent an ambulance from the base out and put me in and studied me all the way back and spent most of the night on x-rays and one thing and another because they couldn't believe that I could ever have submitted that kind of a crash. But the way it turned out was that the engineer was the only person that was actually lost in that plane. But I've often thought what would have happened if that had gone out in the lake. In the B-24, you had to get out through the bomb bay. And so the bomb bay would have been underwater.
Right.
And if you'd have made it to the runway, as soon as that slipstream is over, that thing would have blown sky high. We were only diverting it up to that point. And then if we'd gone any further, we'd have gone into that housing settlement
Right.
with a couple of thousand gallons of petrol. And so really when you look back and think of it, this was the only possible way you could have got out of the plane. And I'd say it's 1 in a trillion that that thing would ever. I was so interested when they had the B-24 out here at the airfield. I went out and looked at the front end of that plane, and I could tell just about where that thing was torn open and so forth. And somebody took a picture of me next to that plane, but I don't know who has it now. Thing. But some of those things, can happen so fast. They're kind of like your accident with the cars when you get into that. So I just continued on with my training. There's a question of whether I'd ever want to fly again, and I went up. I had to drop back to another class, and then another instructor and so forth. But I never felt any fear.
You did. You felt
No.
more or less get right back on the.
You'd have thought you'd wanted to stay clear away from rain, period. But I never really felt that way on it. So, but that was the closest that I ever came in my training process and so forth.
So after your training, you got, I guess, certified as a pilot in a B-24?
Yeah, you got your commission.
Right.
And you then
Where'd you go from there?
Well, then, first of all, they had to put a crew together. So we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, and they put together 9 other people to make the crew of 10 and so forth. And in the write-up that I've been trying to do with it, I've tried to illustrate where those people came from all across the United States, from Arizona to Connecticut.
Right.
But they became as one on the thing. So then we went to Idaho, and we did our final 4-engine training out of Idaho, in which I had relatives from the time I was born, and so I had relatives in Idaho, so that worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that was nice.
Well,
So how long were you there in Idaho for training?
Well, probably about 2 months on
Okay.
training, mostly for formation flying and also for gunnery practice, so that these fellows would know what to do.
Right.
And so then we finished that up, and then they went by train all the way down to Topeka, and I think I have a picture of the crew there at Topeka, and then to Camp Kilmore in New York, and then finally on a boat to Europe after all that time.
Wow.
So most of it was traveling around that particular time.
So when you left the States, where was the boat? Were you going straight to
Over to England?
Over to
Yeah.
England? Where'd you dock, or where'd you come in at?
Yes. See, if I'd have stayed within the same class, I would have gone to Italy. That was the 15th airport. And then the 8th Air Force was the one that was working out of England at that time. And came to be the largest selection of planes collection that has ever been put together. See, we were involved in 2,000 plane raids.
Wow.
And that includes fighter production and so forth. And it's amazing how you could get that many into the air and out of it during that time. But so the 8th Air Force is the one that there.
Right.
And our base was at Wendling, which is a small town, And of course, they just crowded out the British, and we just took over. We had nearly 25 or 26 airfields
Wow.
in that East Anglico area, which is really valuable because we could do all our formation flying and everything else out over the North Sea.
Right.
So we get clear away from England at that point. And so that's where we based on at that time.
I was reading here, it looked like something else happened that, was this in Perry or near Guthrie where you were taking off and you got hit by a plane?
Oh yeah, I had another
It was
episode
taken off
during the time
behind
we were at Enid, at the
Yeah.
Air Vance Air Force Air Base there at Enid, and we were shooting landings at another location, which was just an open field,
Right?
and everybody flew their plane over, and then we'd take off and land, and the instructor then had a pickup, and he had a light, and he'd focus on when you should take off and so forth and return, so we were flying blind, you might say. And actually, I had landed and was going down the strip that you might call a runway, and I didn't get off of it. And the fellow behind me taking off didn't realize it until he got too close. And he pulled up on it, and his propeller took the top of my rudder off and some of the top of my canopy. And left me there with a broken plane.
Wow.
So it was partly my fault. I should have eroded that landing, and he didn't realize it. Of course, he had no lights, and then all of a sudden he was right on top of me, and I
All of a
was
sudden,
right in
there's
front of
a
him.
plane sitting right in front of him.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right. So those things have occurred.
Did
you know.
everybody come out of that okay?
Yeah.
He
yeah.
didn't crash or anything.
No, it was just the top of my canopy that propeller took off. So that's about as close as you want to come with it.
Yeah, to move a propeller, holy cow.
I had to fly back with another fellow because the plane, you couldn't fly it anymore on that. So that was number one.
Wow.
Some of the things that kind of come to you. So
Get back to English. Tell us a little bit about just where you were at, your crew, and maybe were there any particular missions that stand out?
well, we landed in Liverpool and went across by train to Wendling, which is over on the other side and so forth. And of course, the non-commissioned people and ourselves were separated in the Quonset huts. And we had about 10 or so people that were in each Quonset hut near the base and so forth. And they'd fixed up only one runway, and then everything had to go and land from this one runway, so it made it pretty congested at that point and so forth. But my interest in what we were going to fly was kind of came to when, before we took off any flights, I was near the airfield, near the control tower, and they were coming in from a mission, and we had 12 planes that had gone out, and there were only 7 of them that came back. At the time we were there, the Germans couldn't put up a frontal attack on our planes, but they could do it by bushwhacking. And they'd wait and catch these planes out of a cloud formation or something, and then they'd pounce on them, and that was probably the most dangerous part. And normally, when you started over there, they'd let you fly as a co-pilot in another plane to get the feel before you went out with your own crew.
Right.
But in that case, they didn't have time to wait. They just shoved you in a plane, and away you went.
Here's your plane, go. Right.
So you saw flak for the first time, and a lot of heavy flak that the Germans were putting up with their 88s, which
Right.
is one of the greatest guns ever put together. And they were pretty accurate with it.
That's what everyone that we've talked to has said that.
Isn't that right?
About those, yeah.
They were really good. And
Right.
they used them on tanks, they used them on artillery, they used them on anti-aircraft, the whole thing. So, and our first mission was down around Frankfurt, a place called Hanoi. Most of the things we were after then were 2 things. One was the marshalling yards that could paralyze their rail system. And the other was to get at their petrol supply.
Right.
Because they were making a lot of it synthetically, at that time. So if we could hit these oil and gas storage areas and knock them out, it paralyzed what they could do. So that was the 2 things that we were after at that time.
Do you remember what date it was with your first mission? Do you?
I think it was February 9th of 40, that would be 45, I guess.
45?
Yeah.
And how old were you then?
How old?
Yeah.
Oh, about 22, I guess. What am I?
Born in 23.
I'm 23. It was my birthday, so
Yeah.
I would have been 21.
You'd have been 21 or so, 21, 22, and that you'd been so that was your first mission, was basically over Frankfurt or somewhere around there.
Uh-huh. In that area, Hanoi, down in
What
that
was that like, just being a 24-year-old, all of a sudden flying a 4-engine plane, you're fixing to drop
area. I guess
bombs
you're
on
young enough that you kind of take it as it comes and so
Right.
forth. But of course, when you looked ahead and saw the flak that you were going to fly into, it kind of seasoned you down, particularly my
Bring you down a
co-pilot.
couple of notches.
I'll never forget, I looked at my co-pilot as we were going the first one, and the sweat was just coming down over his deal. See, we had to go on oxygen after we got above 12 to 14,000 feet.
Right.
And then one of the problems of the B-24 was when you got much above 20,000, you lost a lot of, you got a lot of mushiness in your controls. And to fly formation, almost wing to wing, took a lot of
Was that just
real
possibly
attention.
maybe the hydraulics kind of
Yeah.
getting sticky from
Yeah,
the
that's
cold?
right. That's
Just-
right, yeah. Uh-huh. So then we started in our regular run of deal with Magdeburg and Dartmouth and some of these other places over there.
What was the average week like? Did you, obviously you didn't fly, unless it was a heavy time, you didn't fly 7 days a week, but maybe fly a day, off a day, what was
About
the average?
every third day at the best, and second day if it was the most, yeah. But we weren't flying as much as the people out of Italy were. See, the 15th Air Force was out of Italy. And I believe if I hadn't gone through the wreck at Fort Worth, I would have been in the 5th, which had been over to Italy. They got a pretty tough go over there. They had to fly the Alps, you know,
Right.
and they didn't have the backup that we had with the RAF and the other things, so they made a difference on them. Well, you see some unusual things that happen to you, and many of them happen all of a sudden on the thing. And I suppose the one that happened closest to me were two planes that collided right off my wing. And
As in two American planes, or an American fighter or a German fighter and an American bomber?
yeah, we were as soon as we'd kind of get over Europe, they'd join us, but they'd wait until we were about into combat area, and then the P-51 was the plane that really changed the deal there.
Right.
And they say, you know, that when Goring in Berlin saw the P-51 as a fighter come over, he knew that the game was over at that
Pretty
particular
much.
time. So they'd come scooting along about the time we hit the continent and so forth, stay with us, and then after we were through, they'd go down and strafe the hell out of all the Germans. Those fighter pilots, you know, they wanted something to do, so they'd go down and make it miserable for the Germans. But as I say, sometimes you see some things that are unusual. I saw one where the bombs clipped the tail off another plane. We were bombing somewhere there in the Ruhr Valley, and the two formations at a different altitude were coming over the same drop area. And I could see we had dropped our bombs and were turning back, and I was watching them. And this top plane was going to fly right over the other one, right over the target. And I knew what was going to happen, but of course there's nothing you could do except watch. And sure enough, when those bombs spilled out, it clipped the tail of one of those planes and tore the whole thing right off.
Oh, goodness.
And left him with a very poor ability to travel. He got back to England, and his crew bailed out, and he tried to use it, and I think he might have been killed trying to get in.
Staying with the plane.
Yeah. So, but I think the worst one with me was when we were going to bomb an area down there on the Ruhr area, right at the edge of it, and we started out what looked like just a normal mission, and we got over the target. We were up about 21,000 or so. We got over the target, and yet the way they stacked up the formation was that you had three planes this way in a V formation, and then you had three planes down below it and behind it, and then you had one on the upper right and one on the lower left. And the reason for that was that they could really use their armament. And you see, every plane at that point could have pointed at least 4 to 6 50 caliber guns, and you add 10 planes to it, you could have put nearly 40 guns on anybody coming in on you.
But nobody was really in the line of fire.
No, that's right, yeah. So that was the reason they did it. But as they did it, the plane down below, we called it the slot. That was the plane of the 3 planes that were down below the top. That was a real hard one to handle if you were the lead plane of the 3, because you were looking up and you had to judge your depth and you had to judge your position for the other 2 planes.
Right.
And I sure wanted that position. I'd flown enough planes, you know, and I thought I really should have it. And I had, they'd give us some breakfast that morning, and Schuster and Dodd were 2 other pilots that had, and Schuster was going to have the lead plane in that. And I was very upset, you know, that he was going to have that when I didn't, so on. And after we got through, I was glad that I didn't make it. Well, what happened was that when we came over the target, apparently he got flak, and he got some injury in there. And it demobilized his ability to move the plane.
Wow.
So I was over here with the plane in front of us, and I looked over here, and that plane was going to crash right into the plane in front of him.
Mm.
And I saw what was happening on it, and I can still remember the propellers of that one plane chewing up the wings of that other one.
Wow.
And all of a sudden there was debris all over, and I pulled up and out to get away from it. And I can still remember that one plane turning over and is already on fire and going down.
Wow.
And you know, when you've known people like that and so forth, it does make a difference.
Sure.
And but I was fortunate, because the same thing would have happened to me if I'd have been in that
position.
plane. Yeah.
Right.
So, but it's quite a blow to see guys, that about 18 of them, you know. Our crew said that they saw 2 shoots, and the result was they claimed they saw 3, but we thought that probably only 2 of those fellows survived that kind of a crash.
Wow.
So those sorts of things, you know, come all of a sudden.
Right.
And you look back on them, you wonder why in the world you ever survived on that sort of thing.
Right.
So that was a close shave on that. One of the best deals that I had, though, in terms of flying this B-24, and of course the B-17 with a broader wing could go higher than we could. They could get up to 25,000, and so when we got over 20,000, why then that rarefied air, you didn't have as much control, and when you're flying formation right up against the other plane, you just didn't have the solidity that you'd want on the deal and so forth. And so we were bombing somewhere, I guess, down in the lower part of the Ruhr. We were taking the Ruhr apart, one city at a time. And we started back up that way. It's kind of a long journey down there and back. And the engineer came up and said, "We're out of fuel, about out of fuel." And we got to looking
Very
at
casual.
what we had.
By the way, we're out of gas.
We got to looking at it and realized that we didn't have enough fuel to get across the North Sea.
Oh, goodness.
And we were stuck on that. So we decided, well, the thing to do is to land the plane somewhere, and we knew there were fighter bases and other plane bases over there. But what we forgot was that the Army was making darn sure you didn't see those. They had them camouflaged.
Right.
And so we went up and down that line, and the co-pilot even got on the radio to see if he could find some help. And he did get a response, and it had a very strong German accent, and it pointed directly back into Germany.
Come land you here. Yeah.
So we gave up on that one.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, while we were
Thanks,
going
but no thanks. We're
up and down, we were using gas. We were getting worse, and it was either then kind of bail out of the plane or do something. And I happened to be just looking out and saw a huge dent, a tarp with the Red Cross on the top of it. And I thought, well, if you're going to do anything here, that would be a good spot.
Yeah, if something's going to happen, let's get by that. Let's stay close to that hospital.
That was a bunch of the 87 Air Bunch that was in a hospital deal at that time. So then the question was, where in the devil are you going to land? And I happened to see this what looked like a long field, like a pasture or a hay field. It had a little slope to it, but it was open, and there weren't any trees on ahead of you. So I figured, well, this is good as any. So we turned around and made our approach to it after we'd flown over it once to see what it looked like. And so we decided to step down, and I'll never forget, as we came down, almost to landing, there was a French farmer with his ox, one ox, and he was plowing. And he stood there and looked at us, and then he dove into the furrow and let off. But I was afraid with that weight of the plane, that you'd really get stuck. But fortunately, that was dry enough and hard enough that we rolled it.
I'll be done.
Yeah. So we rolled on up the plane next to a forest part that they had there and turned it around so that we could get out if we could. And I had no reason to believe that I couldn't fly that plane back out. You get so used to a plane that you know what's happening, so forth. So our engineer was always good at finding something, so he got somebody to give him a ride, and he went around and he did find a fighter base that was not too far from us, but we couldn't have never found it. And so they brought a load of gas to us the next morning and filled us up enough to fly out. But then the question was, are we ever going to get out?
Yeah, is there enough room? So
we took a kind of a hands in the air on the crew as to see who was going to go and who not. And there were several on the crew that didn't think we had that good a chance, but the radio operator said he would. And of course, the co-pilot and I were going to fly the darn thing.
Yeah.
So we, the three of us, and we'd thrown out all our armament, and flak suits and everything else. And we got it revved up. But as we were getting ready to leave, I looked out, and here were a whole bunch of French people that had come to see what was going on. I imagined 30 or 40 of them. And they were older women with their kids because their husbands were probably in a POW camp at that time. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we had quite a crowd out there to see if we were going to make it.
Lovely.
And we had it all worked out, the co-pilot and I, as to how much flap we'd give it, what our airspeed had to be, and things like that. But I never did even walk out that area. As I say, you get to flying a plane enough that you know about what it takes. Mm-hmm. And we were all right until there's a kind of a ditch at the sloped end of this field. And the question was, can we get across the ditch? And sure enough, we got airborne and away we went.
Wow.
So we went to this fighter base. We finally found that and got enough. They were glad to give us enough gas to get rid of us, send us back to England. And I remember we got over the channel, and they sent a Spitfire out to discern whether we were friend or foe, because sometimes they'd capture some of those planes, they'd use the same marking on them.
Oh, okay.
And I don't recall, that fellow went under us and over us, and then finally waved to us and took off. Yeah, so that was an unusual occurrence at that particular point.
Wow.
So, one of the most interesting in visiting London, and we get down there as often as we could, and my navigator had an aunt that lived in the Hackney area of London, which his name was Bernstein, and he was Jewish. And he had an aunt that was living in London at their Hackney area, and he had never seen her, and she had never seen him.
Wow.
But that was his mother's sister. And so he invited us to come and see him, and I remember we went through the doorway, and he put his hand up where the Jewish people do, for a Passover deal.
Right.
And they had a couple of kids. They had some cousins that he'd never seen. They had a couple of young kids, and we'd play with them and so forth. And then we noticed when we were going to eat with them that they were giving us all the good food and not the kids. And so we straightened that out. But I never realized what the Jewish people in London and elsewhere, they knew what was coming. If Hitler ever got in, they knew that was the deal. And he said they were so sensitive during that time of the Battle of Britain that if they'd even heard a backfire on a car, They were just petrified because they knew what would happen to them if that country ever went in and so
Right.
forth. But it's interesting to see how they lived at that particular time.
Right.
So those are some of the instances that kind of come to life when you think back on them.
I was reading here while you were talking, your description of of Dodd and Schuster and the crash of Dodd and Schuster.
Oh, that was the two that collided. Yeah,
Right.
Schuster and Dodd, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they were the two that one wing just it took off the other wing right next to us on that. Yeah.
And that was right in front of you, right? I mean,
I was on the right side of the three, and they were the front and the left.
right.
And that's where they were flying what we used to call the slot, which is that three planes in there.
And they determined that one of the planes must have gotten hit by flak.
That's what they say, yeah. There wasn't much radio conversation going on, but
Right.
they thought that's what happened, because a lot of times, you'd be hit and not know it, or not badly. We got hit in the wing one time coming back from an area down near Austria, and the shell went right up through the wing and exploded up above and shattered all the plexiglass that we had. But anyway, if that thing had been a few inches different, it hit one of those fuel cans
Right.
and so forth.
Yeah.
So, Polly, did I bring those pictures that we had there?
Flying through flak. I've seen it depicted in movies and and other things like that. But just to actually fly through it, you feel kind of helpless, don't you? I mean,
Yeah, and of course what you see is the safe
Right.
part of it. It's the part you don't see.
Exactly.
But you know about what area they're aiming at, is altitude and direction and so forth. And that's the dense area. But you can't get to the target without going through that.
Right.
And so we made 2 trips to Berlin, and it was getting near the end. And,
Were these mostly daylight raids, all nighttime?
Yeah, yeah, we didn't fly at night.
Okay.
And we were different from the RAF. The RAF did it by lone missions. And they'd send out one of these mosquitoes, one of these fastest plane that there was, and they'd drop flares around the area. And then they'd come in their bombers individually and do it. Because they thought that we couldn't formation bomb with all the resistance that we'd have, that it was too expensive in terms of planes. So they would bomb at night. And then right there at the last, before we'd actually bomb Berlin, they started out to eliminate the German system. And Dresden was eliminated. What was it, 25,000 people at Dresden
Right.
were either cremated or done. And the next one was Berlin. That's what we were going to do to Berlin. And so when we went in that morning and saw that, as you go into your briefing, they'd have it staked to the whole map of Europe, and then they'd have a ribbon that would show where you are there and where you're going to bomb.
Right.
And that's the first time that you'd ever have indication where you're going to go.
Where we're going to.
And when we saw that deal to Berlin, we figured this is getting near the end of it and so forth. And one of them, the 26th of March, I'd read later, was one of them that really broke their back in Berlin. But it was kind of a question mark, because as they did the briefing and they showed where we were going to go, and they pointed out to the area of Berlin we were going to bomb, which was near marshalling yards and so forth. But that was right at the time when Germany was losing, and all these people from Russia were coming, and all the refugees in eastern Germany were crowded into Berlin. And ours was a marshalling yard not far from the center of Berlin. And you know when you drop those bombs that they're not going to all hit at the right place.
Right.
And so as I look back on it, well, that was the first time we bombed Berlin. Then the second time, we couldn't get our bomb bay open. When you started on the initial run to make the bomb deal, why then our darn bomb bay doors got stuck. So we couldn't drop along with the other people in the squadron. And so then we emptied, when they finally cranked it open, we emptied out on someplace in Germany.
You just dropped them to get
But you
them
know,
out.
I have always thought that I was kind of glad, because they didn't need our bombs, and at least we didn't cremate
Right.
a lot of other people. So we kind of have different opinions as we
Right.
go along.
How many missions did you have to complete before your tour would be up?
Well, it was going to be 25. We got to 23. And so we're getting near the end, but of course they're spreading it out.
Well, so you got to 23 and that's when the war ended, or?
Yeah, that was it, yeah. By
So
that
you were
time.
actually stationed over there, I guess, when it
Yeah,
was
when it toward the end of the war, which is a good thing for us, because the first ones over there took a terrible beating.
Right.
Well, that was that part. So then when the war was over, it's kind of interesting. We happened to be on a leave up in Scotland, I guess it was, when we heard the war was over. And I didn't see as much frivolity going on over there as it was maybe they show over here, you know.
Yeah,
They were kind of glad to get it over at that
I'm
time.
sure, well, I'm sure, yeah.
And so then the question was what was going to happen now that the war is over. And, you know, a general and a colonel can always figure out something to do. So they decided that they would have us tour the ground crews over Germany so we could see what they had done.
Right.
So they'd load in about 10 or 12 of the ground crew as our own crew too, and we would fly at low altitude, and so they could see places like Cologne and some
Right.
other places like that. But one thing occurred that I've always remembered. We were down, just a couple hundred feet up, and we were going off the edge of, over the edge of Germany, and there was a place that had been hit and just destroyed, the buildings that they had, the stone house and everything else. And here was a couple of people that I kind of guessed were older people. They had one ox, and they were trying to pick up the stone and put the thing back together again. And you know, really, you kind of wondered on that sort of thing. I've never forgotten it. And they were kind of going to put back together what was left, or whatever they had to think.
Just keep, that's all you can do is keep trying to move forward. Did you, when you did those runs down at that low altitude, obviously you could also, so your crew could also see much more clearly the devastation.
Oh, yeah.
Did that set with you a little differently since you're dropping bombs at what, 12,000 feet?
Well, you know, you really wouldn't see anything you dropped.
Right.
And particularly flying in the pilot or co-pilot, you didn't see. You were busy on the
Right.
on the plane. But by the same token, all the bombs. See, we had the nose gunner that had a toggle switch, and in under our way of doing it, rather than individual planes, you flew as a formation, very close, just 100 foot apart. And then the lead plane would have the bombardier, and he'd drop with a flare. And as soon as he dropped, why then your nose gunner would hit a toggle switch and drop everything else you had.
So everybody worked off
Yeah.
of that
But
lead
gosh,
bomb.
you know, when you put every one of those planes had 8 to 10 bombs, and you had 10 planes, and you had what they could have hit, you know, and they just saturated the whole area on it. So that was our way of doing business. So under those conditions, you never saw what hit and so forth.
Right.
It just went on through on the thing.
I'm reading the paragraph that you just described about seeing the oxen and the couple working to try to, you say, working to gather up all the battered remains of stone and debris that must have once been their dwelling. In just the seconds that flashed by, I had a feel for these two elderly people working to recover and restore all that was left. Despair must have gripped them, yet it seemed that there was also a flicker of hope that the homestead could be restored. It's
Well,
amazing that snapshot stays with you.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
you know it does. Now, of course, we could have that feeling. The fellows that were over there at first didn't have that same kind of feeling. I can understand it and so forth.
Exactly.
But really, you kind of wonder, what the heck did you really get out of that? And then I was really concerned. I wouldn't mention this on the deal, but as we went back to our planes after we'd had that briefing for the middle of Berlin, the co-pilot and I kind of looked at each other and thought, well, now this is a mass murder. Because here were those people streaming back all over the place. They couldn't have possibly found shelter. And we were going to burn the whole schmear.
Yeah.
So when you look at it that way, you'll do what your duty calls, you know, but you kind of wonder,
Sure.
particularly after it's over, it was really worthwhile at that time.
I saw earlier when I was reading that you were disappointed that you didn't go with the group to London. You wanted to see Churchill, but
Yeah.
you didn't get a chance to see Churchill, right?
They went down. For some
Yeah.
reason, I stayed there at the base, and he came out of Parliament and walked across there. And I've always thought one of two men, Lincoln and Churchill, that I'd like to have seen. So they were different that way. Well, to kind of wind it up so you fellas can get on your business, we got through with the war and we made this tour of the places over there with our ground crew. And so we kept thinking, gosh, the thing to do is to take the plane, go home, and sure enough, for some reason that I've never understood, they picked out a passel of us and said, fly the plane back.
Oh, darn.
And obviously, we didn't argue with them on that.
Where can we go? Yeah.
So we got our crew together for the last time, and then they put another ground crew with us. So we had about 20 or 25 in the plane. And we started out and landed in Wales to fuel up as much as we could.
So what was that flight like?
And
With those 20 guys knowing basically you're flying home. It's over with. You've
just a
already-
little more responsibility, you know. You kind of stayed glued to the instruments and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because it was,
And,
exactly. Let's make sure this flight does last.
yeah.
Yeah.
Really, you know, in terms of experience, you got to the point as a pilot, you paid more attention to the instruments than anything else. And particularly on takeoffs. I'd let the co-pilot even do the takeoff some of the time, and I was glued on the fuel pressure, on the engine pressure, on the speed, on the whatever we were living on.
Right.
Because really, that's where the history was. Because you only had a few minutes, seconds to decide.
To decide what to do.
And one of our planes didn't make it on that and crashed on the other side of the airstrip.
Mm.
So those things, I think you kind of become a retinue and work on that.
So
Well, you were headed home and with the idea that you'd be home for a while and then headed to Japan, right?
Yeah. They refurbished it, so to speak, and so I went to South Dakota.
Yeah.
And the airfield there, and they're putting all these back together and they're going to readjust them.
Right.
And the idea was to get ready to relieve the guys that were flying in the South Pacific.
Mhm.
And so I was there at the control area one time and looked, and they had a piece on the bulletin board and said the farmers around here are having a terrible time getting their crops in. If you would let them know where you were at any time, you could go work with them. So boy, I thought that was a lot better than sitting around that deal as a farm boy.
yeah.
And so I took them up on it, and they went about 20 miles from Sioux Falls and dumped me out with my duffel bag. And this fellow was trying to harvest a crop of wheat, of oats, and all he had was a binder and an old farm-all tractor.
Wow.
And he'd arranged the two so that he could guide that tractor from the binder
Wow.
and bind this doggone field. So he took me out there to get me started. I'd have somebody shock grain for him, which I'd done for all the time when I was growing up. And I looked at that field, and it was 80 acres.
Wow.
And the farm that I grew up on was 87 acres. And I thought, holy smoke, have I got to shock this whole thing? And so I started in as Dad always told me to and so forth. And this was a young farmer and his wife that had 3 young kids. And about the middle of the morning, I wasn't making much of a dent on that darn field, you know, shocking them, so forth. And I looked up, and here came the farmer's wife with the 3 kids. And they had a basket with them. And they came out with pie and cake and everything about it and gave me a lift. And then that afternoon, about 4 o'clock, after we'd had a big meal, they came with a real deal.
Oh, wow.
That was a real meal. So I got a kick out of that. So I stayed with them about a week or 10 days, and everybody back in the deal. And I got back to the base there after other people relieved us. And I walked into the Quonset hut where we were staying, and my co-pilot was sitting on the top bed of this bunk deal. And he said, we just heard over the radio they dropped a bomb somewhere. And that bomb has done all kinds of we didn't know what the devil it was.
Right.
But that was the first time I'd heard of the atomic bomb. From there. From then on, why, then it was a matter of trying to get out rather than get in
Right.
at that point. So you have a lot of remembers of the thing. And I and the co-pilot, we went to see him, didn't we, out to Oregon. And I think one of the most amusing thing, his name was Snowhill, Tom Snowhill, and he was co-piloting with me, and we were making some longer flights out of Idaho, and we got out toward Portland. And he got to wanting me to figure out some way that plane was disabled so he could land there and see his girlfriend.
That gauge isn't working quite right.
But the funniest thing was that he had some time off between when he was in a training and when he was assigned to us, and he fell in love with another gal, and madly in love with her. So they decided that they were betrothed, but in the meantime, he'd given his engagement ring to the first one.
Oh, goodness.
So the question was then, and he was a person that never took anything for the wrong, he wrote to the jeweler and asked, or to her, the one he was getting rid of, if she would kindly take that to the jeweler and so he could refit it for this other girl.
Oh, goodness. Well, there you go.
And Polly and I have always figured, he never told me what happened, but I don't think he got very far.
Probably never got the ring back, huh? Yeah, that's what we got.
So when did you and Polly hook up back again? I mean, after.
It got through. Then I went back to Oklahoma State, or went down there after I graduated at Michigan State and got my degree.
I see.
And got my PhD, and then came down here to A&M, and I was associate dean here for, what was it, Polly?
8 years.
8 years. Then we went to New Mexico, and I was dean out there for, 6 years?
10 years.
And then we came back to A&M and started this leadership development program, TAL, that they have here. And got that started. And now I'm working with their international program, where they have about 45 states.
He's volunteering.
So.
It's not really work, he's volunteering.
That's the best kind of work.
But actually, he came down to Oklahoma to do 1 year of graduate work.
Right.
And he didn't want to live in Oklahoma because he'd been there in the service and he didn't think much of Oklahoma. But he decided to get his PhD and he stayed on, and then we married, and he lived there for 20 years before he came down here. So it wasn't so bad after all.
Yeah, obviously it was 20 years.
Can't get out of there.
Where'd y'all live in Oklahoma?
In Stillwater.
In Stillwater, okay.
Of course, you're a native of Deer Duncan.
I am in
Yeah.
South Central
Right.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So 56 years
Yeah.
married life.
1951, y'all were married?
So it
In January.
kind of kept us
So it
busy
won't be long
all
till
the
it's
time.
57.
Yeah.
But gosh, you guys have had some good programs. You really have, and that's why.
Well, we're about to have another one too.
Yeah, yes, sir. We'll be taping another good one Thursday. Absolutely.
But you know, they
This
must
is exactly the kind of story that we like. This is amazing because just 3 days ago, I like to go and rent old movies, especially World War II movies. And just 3 days ago, I watched Memphis Belle.
Oh,
Yeah, and you're telling the story
Yeah.
of all that. It's like I'm
Yeah.
reliving that movie,
Yeah.
Memphis Belle. That was a great movie.
oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a wonderful, wonderful movie with great
Those
scenes.
boys took a real hit on that one, you know, because they didn't have the formation flying we did for some reason. We were so tightly cooked that if anybody that came close to it, 50 caliber machine gun was waiting for them. So
Right.
Yeah,
we would have a warning that there were banders in the area, which meant that there were some German fighter planes around there, and we'd group up for them. But that's about as close we saw the fighter end of it.
Really? So you never really got that much
Not with a direct one, yeah. So, and they used to come over and strafe our bells once in a while on basis. Yeah.
Right.
But
And we did go back to the base in 2000, I think it was. We'd wanted to. Every time we went through England, we thought, well, we just needed to go back and see it.
Yeah.
And so we went back over in 2000 and saw the base. And
Duxford, is that their museum?
This is the picture of the
North of
monument that
London?
they have put up for the, and I thought that was really interesting.
Wow.
They keep it just
is
beautifully
this for the
done.
8th Army or for your squadron? Oh, okay, I see. The 392nd Bomb Group.
And then there, I think on the other side are a couple more too.
the interesting to me
Maybe-
was in some of
maybe the
those
other
halls
way.
there, they had a plaque with the
That
names.
was some of the area we drove all
Oh,
around
gosh.
there.
Right.
But
We
I
lost
thought that was
750 in our own base.
really interesting, and it was
Wow.
And
right
they had
after
they
Armistice
had the
Day,
names
so
up
they
there.
had poppies
They had
every
names.
place.
Wow.
Yeah.
But, and maybe one more hasn't, this was from a little bit more distance, so they have the flags there.
Is there anyone
So-
from
But
your
they
original
dedicated
crew
that
still,
to the
still around?
eighth-
Are you here
Only
for
one
it?
that I've.
Only one?
He's out of Pittsburgh. He
Oh,
was a
okay.
tail gunner.
Oh, okay.
And unfortunately, I didn't keep close tabs, and they kind of
We were so glad to
evaporated.
see that,
Yeah.
and they made a
Co-pilot
turkey
and I,
farm
and
out
the
of the
radio
base.
operator and I were close. Most of them are
Really?
gone now.
And there was one Quonset left, I think it's in the next one.
What squadron were you?
392nd.
Mhm.
The interesting thing on that deal was the names they had of the people that had been
This is
lost.
the only,
And I wanted to
that's
find out my
left.
crew.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly one of them that had been a navigator
and I-
that had lived in
it
our.
was so interesting to
Quonset
do
up
that, to
there.
go back and see the area.
And I gave my niece was with me, and I said, look up, let's see, I wanted to find Schuster and
Right.
Dodd, and both of them. And I called out their names, and she said, yeah, it's panel number 16.
And that was the
So I could find the
Duxford,
name.
It's on.
And then I told her
all the
to
rest
find
of it, the
Robert
Duxford,
Johnson, who was a navigator, and a very
Museum.
close friend, I
Wow.
thought at that time. And she said, well, there's a whole host of Robert Johnsons.
Johnson's, yeah.
And I said, look for Robert G. Johnson. And she said, yeah, here it is.
Wow.
And to me, that was really interesting to see the names of those guys that you know on the deal.
Yeah.
So they have a beautiful museum over there north of England, north of London.
At Duxford, that,
Yeah.
I think it's on over there someplace.
So how many, on an average, and maybe it varied between missions, but was there a standard group? Was it always 10 planes, or did sometimes was
No.
it 30 planes?
No,
Was
they just parceled them out.
it- Okay,
And depending on how much they wanted to hit it,
right.
and you never knew until you walked into the deal where you're going to go, where you're going to hit on that.
Right, or how many planes were involved, that kind of thing?
And they'd have a ribbon with our location at Wendling, and then they'd have the end of the ribbon and maybe someplace in around Frankfurt or something like that. And that was the first you knew
Where you were
of
going?
whatever it's
How,
going to be.
so each, what, 6-7 hours?
Or more.
Or
or
not,
more.
right,
Kind of a long haul. on
right.
that.
I thought there were always more than 10 planes, though. You always had lots
yeah.
of planes.
Yeah. See, the squadron had 30 planes, and then the wing had 3 of those squadrons.
So a wing was about 90
Yeah.
planes.
And the 8th Air Force could put up, at one time, they put up 3,000 planes up and down in one day.
Mm,
So they were the largest air flight that was ever put together,
right.
finding out of that. And essentially broke the bank of Germany with what they could do.
Great trip this must be.
Yeah, that was really neat. And that'd be nice to see that Duxford Museum
Yeah.
again. They were putting together a B-24.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, I saw that in there.
Yeah.
And they would have had it the next year or so. I'm sure they have it together at this point.
Well, the 24 was not, as you might say in many instances, was not quite as good as the 17. 17 could fly higher than we could, but the 24 could carry more bomb.
Okay.
So when these 2 planes landed out here a few months ago, I don't have the picture, but I had one gal take a picture of me standing by this 24 up there. And the first time I'd been inside that 24 in something like, what, 30 years?
Right.
Like that.
Well, now, we went to the reunion at Fort Worth, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Bill had open heart surgery in March, and in May, they had a reunion at Fort Worth, and we went up to that. And you got to put your head up into a plane at that point.
Wow.
They wouldn't let you in it, but
Yeah.
you could at least look up. That was the first time I realized that there wasn't a door that you could get out of.
Yeah, so you climb up to this hole.
A good land.
Well, that plane was parked almost at the plane it was that night that we left to go in the lake.
Wow,
And it was almost in the same location on the parking lot as the one that we had.
holy
That's
cow.
interesting. But you know, they could do so much mass production on the 24. See, you had Long Beach in California. We had the one there at Carswell at Fort Worth. And then Mammoth plane there at a manufacturing shop at Detroit, that area. And they claimed that the 3 of them could put out one in a little over an hour.
Wow.
That thing, with all the tremendous steel. And that was one thing about the 24, you could mass produce them.
Right.
And you didn't have to have a lot of hand help, and so that made a difference.
Do you have any pictures of you when you were in the service? Any like official photograph or anything like that, or?
What do I have, Polly?
I don't think you do.
Okay.
You had one in this picture of when you were in the paper,
Yeah,
and for some reason, we can't find
I
that.
can't find that either.
I
Okay.
don't know where that
Okay.
is.
I don't know where So
So I don't think we do have
you
it.
only, this is a whole
Yeah.
thing. I was just sort of quick reading while he was talking on the whole thing, but he's even got a table of contents there where you can go to the parts and get them.
Well, I knew that you didn't want to read all that.
But I thought the
Oh,
children
you'd be
needed
surprised.
to
I have a
follow
feeling
Oh,
I sit down
absolutely.
tonight and have me a nice
So glad he
drink.
did.
And I'm
He's
pretty
doing
sure that nobody else wants to read it, so I just wanted to make
You're a good writer. It was just the
Oh, I
parts that
love
I
to
read
read.
and everything are tremendous.
Actually, he was going to, he took journalism when he first went to school.
Yeah.
Michigan State, but changed
But-
to ag. Well, it was ag journalism that
Yeah.
you took at Michigan State.
But you know, I say again, when I look at the kind of people that you've had in this program, this is just kind of
They're
dull
just like
stuff.
you.
Honest,
That's
man.
okay. This is.
And
this
it
is
wouldn't
the-
bother me a bit if you didn't go through with it.
Well,
I
no,
don't know
we
whether I
wanna-
could
we,
or not.
We want to do a show on it. I mean, no, just the stories
Yeah,
that you tell and just that you served and that you flew.
well, it's been a tremendous program. How many have you had so far?
About 75.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, we look forward to it. If
Yeah,
we don't
we
get
do.
that
Yeah.
one, we get the next night, don't we?
Yeah, about 75 shows that we've done.
That and the paper write-ups are good.
Yeah,
too.
that Bill Youngkin does.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Youngkin.
Where did the idea come about that you would have this kind of a program?
Well, I started it on radio, actually. I'm on WTAW radio every morning
Uh-huh.
on 1620. And I do a daily show called Brazos Valley. And when I first started that in 1999, about every week or every 2 weeks, I would feature a veteran story as part of the show. It would be sort of a feature. And one day, John Bennett, the TV station manager, called me and said, hey, we'd like to take that concept of the veteran and put it on television. And we talked about it and started calling veterans, and Dr. Jim Cooper, who's my doctor, was my first show that I had.
Is that right?
And we did it, and First National Bank signed on as an underwriter. So we got it, paid for, and we just started doing
How
it.
about that?
Yeah.
How about
We
that?
just started doing it.
Well, they've had
Really
such
good.
unusual tales.
Yeah,
Guys, it goes down on the Indianapolis.
right,
Good grief, I never realized
yeah,
that they were
Yeah.
that way.
yeah. That's,
But-
You would be surprised, Sheila, was right here in the Brazos Valley when you start hearing their stories, yeah.
Is that right? Is that right? Huh?
You really, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's amazing who lives
Yeah.
around here.
a lot of it is the influence, obviously, of Texas A&M and people who came back
Yeah.
here to stay.
Yeah, isn't that
and all
right?
of that.
Isn't
So,
that right? Yeah.
Especially the World War II classes,
Yeah.
like those classes of, 43 and 44, that
Yeah.
every one of them left school and
Isn't that right?
went off to the war.
Isn't that right?
So, yeah, that's
And
great.
Paula, you and I agreed that there was a totally difference of opinion, of not criticism, but of feeling of being wanted at that time.
That's true,
And
that's true.
and the way those fellows sort of responded to it was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And of course, when we were there in Europe, the bulge was going on, and it so
Right.
coincided with the worst weather they'd ever had,
Right,
and you couldn't get to them to help on anything
Right.
like that. And,
Yeah.
so really, there wasn't much Air Force help we could give them at that point. They must have
Yeah.
gone through hell.
I've talked to several who were ground soldiers who were involved in the bulge, and every one of them just talk about the weather.
Oh, yeah.
And, the
Terrible.
battle, one of the main battles was just saving their feet.
That's
you
right.
know, and,
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So from that point of view, we were doggone lucky to be on the other side. Didn't go through any of the deal that they had.
right, right,
So,
right.
but,
Well,
no,
good. You want to tell him when to be there and all that? And
Thursday,
what we'll do?
okay, we're gonna shoot the show Thursday at 2:30 at the you know where the station is?
Yes, I know where it is.
Okay. You could be there, 2:15,
Right there on
something like that.
campus, right there.
Yes, right. If we turn left at the light and on up the first building.
Exactly.
Exactly,
That's
and
right.
right when you get next to our building on the street, I think it's called Lot 48, turn in to the left, and then as soon as you turn in left, make an immediate right, and there's 4 spaces facing the street
Oh, okay.
that say reserved 24 hours.
Oh, all right.
Those are for visitors.
Okay, okay. Because I didn't know whether it had to park in the back or where.
Yeah, no, they
Right there.
can't
Okay.
park in the back anymore. They've put dumpsters there and taken all the other ones away for the athletic department, of course.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as
Right
soon
there
as
at the right.
right there to the right, and you'll see these 4 spaces that say mark 20, reserved 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And if for some reason they're full, go ahead and park in the back, and then come on into the building, and we'll get you a placard or something for your
Okay.
car, or
Okay.
find out who's in those other 4 spots and make sure it's not a student.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And but maybe 2:15,
Yeah.
something like that, and then we pretty much can sit down and start rolling tape right about 2:30, 2:35, something like that, and it's 28 and a half minutes straight through,
So,
unless
Okay.
I can't read something.
can you edit the darn thing?
We don't edit anything. It's pretty much live to tape. We can't edit, and we've done that before because I've
Yeah,
messed up some.
yeah.
On rare occasion that we've had, but actually it's what you see on TV is exactly what you get. It's
Yeah.
just,
And
it's
it's
just you
nothing-
and Kyle sitting there having a discussion.
We could
Yeah.
take what we did right now, and if we'd had cameras here, we just did the
Right.
show
Is that right?
basically.
Is that right, Doc?
We just basically did the show.
One of my problems that I've come to with old age is my hearing. And my
Well, you all will
earbuds.
be actually closer together than you are right now.
Yeah, we'll be a lot closer.
Can you hear me all right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Can you hear?
It sounds like I got my head in a barrel, and I just
He
don't
hates
have
his
any.
hearing aids.
And
Well,
I
he'll-
wondered if anybody ever asked a question, if I could really understood what they,
Well, he'll be on your left and he'll be closer to you, so he'll be on your left.
Right.
Like, yeah, sort of like Polly is right now, but closer to you.
okay.
Yeah,
Well, fortunately, that's where I probably, if I get background noise,
yeah.
then it really
Well,
makes a
there probably
difference.
isn't any background noise there.
There's nothing in there to make
So
background.
that
It'll be pretty quiet.
ought to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, and it goes by very quickly.
Yeah.
Everybody that has been on the show, and this is true for anything you do, once you start and you get into it, all of a sudden I'm going to say we're out of time, and you're going to go, we're through? That's it. No, I've got some more to tell you.
Maybe
Yeah,
that could be done early, Bob.
It goes by quick.
Well, you know, so many in service have gone through a lot more than I ever did. It's the part that gets me. Gosh, you're talking to guys that get far more than I ever did.
And I
I
think
was
it's
caught up in a
interesting
certain part
too
of it.
that they didn't talk about it at first. You know, it's just been recently, it seems like that most of them have been talking about it.
Right.
Right.
One thing that would be nice if I could do it,
Yeah.
I'd like to encourage other veterans to put something down,
Right.
because I think historians in the future, they want to get a hold of something if a guy was already there.
Right.
And if they haven't written anything, or any other way, taping, they ought to put down their deal.
Yeah,
Well, they
well,
can
absolutely.
do
What you've
that
done there
too.
is just fantastic.
Well, actually,
For your,
something that it's ongoing, I think, with the state of Texas and with the nation, but they're doing this
Yeah.
national, I forget what the official title is, but it's a living
Yeah,
history
yeah,
of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm starting to tape everybody with the microphone, because
Yeah.
now, even though we just talk, we do have,
Yeah.
from your own
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
a little bit of what you went through. So we can eventually take all these
Yeah.
and have a huge archive of
But
files
that tale of the fellow that really was there,
yeah,
and particularly those people in Europe on the ground, would be something. And I think more and more of the historians of the newer sets passing away are going to demand to see what the guy thought that was really out
Absolutely.
there.
And
any kind of
they
a
have to kind of
plug
hurry
in
up and do
for
it,
that.
because there's a lot of them slowly.
I know what we've forgotten to talk about is your family. Talk about,
Oh, well, I have the wife.
Yeah.
For 6 years.
Right.
We have 3 children,
uh-huh.
and now we have 5 grandkids.
5 grandchildren and 1 great
And 1 great grandkid,
And another one
and
on the
another
way.
one coming.
All right.
So we've done pretty well.
Where are your children and grandchildren?
Go ahead, Paul, you're the.
There, 2 live in Kansas and 1 in Oklahoma.
I see.
So not any of them are around here.
I see.
So we have a son, our older son is with K-State,
Uh-huh.
and
So he
they
lives
have
in
4
Manhattan,
children.
yeah.
And all their children have gone through K-State.
I see.
We've done more for Kansas than we ever did.
Then our second son is in Oklahoma.
Uh-huh. Where in Oklahoma?
Well, he's near our home place
Uh-huh.
there in the Marlow area at this point. He was teaching at Cameron University, and they ran out of money, so he's not teaching there right now.
I see.
But he is there still in the same area.
Yeah.
And then our daughter is back at K-State. her husband graduated from there. So they're back there, and they're all in agriculture.
I see.
All of them are.
I can bet it at that
Grandchildren
school.
too.
Yeah.
Grandchildren too. And so that most of them are up there.
Yeah.
And anyway,
Are y'all gonna get together for the holidays or?
we did last week in Oklahoma.
Oh, did you? Good.
And then we
Good.
will have at least 2 of them and some of the kids here at
At
Christmas.
Christmas time? Good.
So
That's
we'll
wonderful.
expect a bunch of them down for Christmas.
Great, great.
Let me ask you, would it be possible to lighten that picture that came out in the newspaper?
I don't know. You,
Well, what I'll do, first thing I'm gonna do is this was out of the Fort
Could I-
Worth Star Telegram.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
I'll
On
go
the
ahead
front
and
page.
I'll
look
go
it
to
up.
their, some of these bigger papers now, and especially with the Star Telegram, because it's a regional, it's looked at a lot. They've started to
archive a lot.
digitally archive a lot of this stuff.
Is that right?
So they may actually have a search thing on their website, and
Yeah.
I may be able to pull this actual
Well,
old
that's
picture
right.
up
Yeah.
digitally.
That's
Um,
right.
What was it, Paula? It was May 14th?
Well, is the
Or
date on
13th.
it?
I didn't see
Do we
the
have
date.
the?
I don't, no, it's not.
Oh, we didn't have.
I
thought we
tell
had
about
it.
what date that
I thought
is
we
in
had
here.
Here we
the
go.
date.
So this was taken right afterwards, right?
I'm trying to see if it says in here in the article anywhere, and I didn't bring my
But
glasses.
actually, that is actually what I saw, exactly, when I came to.
Wow.
So it makes it a little different that way.
So they might have that on.
They very well could, sure.
You know, it's funny,
May the
we go around
May
the
the
west side,
12th.
of Fort Worth. I've never really gone back to that spot. I ought to kind of veer off sometime there and see if I
Yeah.
could locate
It's easy
that.
to
I don't
locate
know how
that
we
spot.
could locate it.
Uh,
Things change, so it'd be hard to locate.
Oh, I imagine not, yeah.
Yeah, probably May the 14th was probably when that, or it looked like y'all took off May the 12th, and the crash actually happened, early the morning of May the 13th,
Yeah, I
right?
think you're right.
Yeah. At 1 a.m., or about 1:30 a.m.
And May
Yeah,
12th
it's
is
here,
the time that
30.
my parents got wedded,
Their wedding anniversary was May the 12th,
and this was May the 13th.
and they got a telegram saying that you were all right,
Yeah.
but you had been in a crash, or I've forgotten how it was worded, but
So when I get back to the office, I'll go
May
ahead.
12th of 1940, of when? What year?
44 was the day?
40,
or
43.
43.
43, I guess,
Yeah.
yeah.
May 14th of 43.
13th.
May 13th, you're right.
13th.
May 13th.
It probably was in that day. Well, it might have been.
No, it probably May the 14th.
It
It's
might
right
have
when it
been
was
in the
in the paper.
14th,
Right.
right.
Because if I'm looking at it right, your flight was actually on May the 12th. Now,
So-
either
so-
that would have been, but you actually crashed about 1:30 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, uh-huh.
So it probably would have been May 13th.
day.
So it wouldn't have been in the paper that day. It'd probably been the
On the
14th,
14th.
somewhere around there, 13th or 14th. Yeah.
So it might be able to get a,
Yeah, I'll put that, and I'll
Yeah.
go back and see if it's in there digitally.
You mind if he takes this and gives it back to you on
no,
Thursday?
we'll keep together.
Yeah. That's
I'm
great.
still working on the last part of it, and the wife's about ready to throw me out.
No, I'm not. I just wish we had more pictures, and we just realized we don't have.
Well, if in the next 2 days you find anything, I didn't know whether if you just had your official Army Air Corps photograph somewhere or something like that or anything like that. If you
One
come up,
had in the paper, I don't remember any.
if you come up with anything, between now and then, you can bring it with you and they can shoot it, out there.
Would this one of the memorial be any good, you think?
Kyle hadn't,
Absolutely, well, yeah.
yeah,
well,
they
sure.
visited in 2000.
Let's see, that's Duxford. This is Duxford where we're working on it.
Oh, absolutely, some of these would be really good.
Okay.
Um,